Hey everyone, I'm Mike Henry. And welcome to the piece I call It Came From Beyond to Procreate demo. So I understand that people like the characters from this series quite a bit and they like seeing the videos about them, but I have explained the process quite a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to start first with talking about the genesis of the character and the sort of like rough part of it. I'm going to talk a little bit about the background on the character because I know some people are interested in that, but then we're going to go pretty quickly through the main chunk of the process because it's been done many times before. Now, if you are new to the channel and you would like to see that full process completely explained, go back to any of the other monster characters that kind of look like him, that came from the same kind of lineup. You'll find a lot more explanations in there. All right, let's get started. So at the very beginning I knew that I wanted to have an alien character. Once I had already started having some of these other characters like vampires and stuff, I knew that an alien would be a fun thing to start expanding the lineup so that it wasn't just about these classic monsters, but it was also about the classic alien stuff. You know, trying to kind of lightly reference things like This Island Earth, even though this character doesn't look like the mutant from This Island Earth, but it's the same idea of that sort of sci-fi. We've got monsters, we've got aliens, etc., etc. So that was the spirit behind this. Now, something that I wanted to do was I wanted to try some different things, maybe loop in a couple of ideas that are in other alien things, but try to do something that I at least felt like I was owning a little bit. A while back, I did a piece of an alien that was based off of a game called The Dark Room that you can go back through the channel and you could find, and that alien was yellow. I thought it'd be cool to revisit that. In fact, at the beginning of this piece, there are a lot of color palette things that are very similar to that piece because it was kind of like me self-referencing, but also just I like that palette and I wanted to kind of use it again. I do ultimately end up changing it, but at least in the end, it's still a yellow alien, which was the main thing, right? Some other things that you might notice here that are kind of a reference to things that I really like is the hand layout. Even though the hand layout is like long and lanky, the 2 fingers, 2 thumbs is a direct pull from the Neo Sapiens from Exo Squad, which I think is one of the best American cartoons ever made. Now this character from the beginning also was going to always involve these glyphs. I wanted something that was glowy, that fit with everybody else, that he himself could do, that would be kind of like unique for him. So that is why, like from the get-go, when you saw me doing the color blocking, his hand is generating that glyph. Now the idea for 4 arms didn't come until later. There was actually a point where I was going to have Lucy with 4 arms, and then I thought, no, that doesn't really fit. There's already kind of a lot going on with that character. And my wife was like, well, why don't you put it on the alien? And I had already kind of hoped to put tattoos on the alien. So I was like, dude, 4 arms, 4 sets of tattoos. So let's stop right here for a second. This is where the character sat kind of in development hell for a long time. I liked him, I liked the gist of him, but I felt like there was more that I could do with him. I had not come up with the 4-arm idea, or should I say, my wife had not yet said give him 4 arms yet, so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Now there are some things that I still like about this version that isn't in the final. I like that he's a little skinnier. I do kind of like this expression as well, but there was something about this that still didn't feel like there was enough going on. And once I decided to add 4 arms, I thought I needed to also improve the pose a little bit. So he sat in Procreate, just in my sort of like kind of working on them right now pieces for a really long time, and I ended up doing like Zola and Ansel and basically everyone from Ansel on. He was sketched and flatted before Ansel, and then everybody after that, like Fulgencio, they all were drawn after he was already drawn and flatted. And then finally I was like, okay, I need to get back to this guy because it's not that I don't like the character as an idea, it's just that I felt like I was missing something. Now you might be looking at this and looking at the final and being like, it's not that different, but there's enough changes there that I felt like I needed to apply some thinking to kind of like fix. So here you can see I start first addressing the face, thinking that maybe the face isn't it. Now the thing about this is I thought there were some good ideas here, but I thought it was pulling him a little bit too much into like a bug, and I really wasn't going for like a bug alien. I wanted to go for more of just like a alien. Here I start messing around with the posing to try and see like, hey, can I get the poses? But I didn't really like the vibe of them. The attitude wasn't really there. So let's pause it again. This here is then where he sat again for like another week. The only thing that his forearms are doing is the same pose that he was doing before, except now he has his hands on his belt. Like his two hands are casual and his other hands are, I don't know, doing something else. This was clear that I needed to go in this route, but that it needed to be just a better pose overall. What ends up happening is I end up sketching him cracking his knuckles kind of with the one hand, or with the two sets of hands, and then the rest of the arms are actually very similar to this pose that we've got going on here. You'll notice, though, one of the biggest changes, which is from a subtle series of changes, is his attitude. Here he goes from almost looking like spooked or maybe a little dopey or whatever to being a little bit more of an attitude, or at the very least a little bit more like he has some agency. We gave him some muscles just to kind of toughen him up a little bit. I mean, he is kind of like a street alien, so he's got to defend himself every now and then. He can't be too skinny, even if he's like alien strong or something like that. And then we've also got him cracking his knuckles. His head is turned away from us and then looking at us, which is usually a sign of kind of like disregard, or like he's leery of us or something like that. And that all of that felt like more what I wanted to really communicate with this character. By the way, trying to figure out how an alien with that hand setup would like crack his knuckles is like was weird. I had to like kind of use my hands and kind of figure it out. It was very weird. But anyways, now let's start talking about this character, because as this sketch happens, the rest of it is kind of like, okay, make it like the other one, except I went for more of a jean jacket than like a puffy vest. It's like a ripped jean jacket. But anyways, the premise of this character, and it was the premise of him from the very, very beginning, is that he's essentially not a graffiti artist, but I guess a street artist, and he does it with these glyphs that he generates. He's able to generate these glowy glyphs that stay somewhere for a certain amount of time, and then they eventually go away. The interesting thing is that Rolf can't actually talk with his mouth to anybody. You can't really see it, but if he were to open his mouth really, really wide, he kind of has like bristles, almost like a whale, not like really hard teeth or anything like that, and he doesn't have a tongue, so he can't actually talk. However, he's hyper intelligent, he has a lot to say, and he's smart enough to understand the people around him. He can even write stuff down if he really wants to, but it's really inefficient. Instead, what he does is he generates these glyphs with his hands that are made up of this like glowy material kind of, and what he does is he rewrites aspects of your thoughts that are in your brain through your eyes, and then makes it so that you understand what he's trying to get at. It allows him to actually communicate way more than we can with words, because it's more about like communicating like notions and feelings and all of that kind of stuff. So if you're talking, quote unquote, to Rolf, he's holding his hand up. His hand is stationary. He's not necessarily doing anything like, he's not doing like ninjutsu or anything like that. And then he's generating these glyphs. He can actually use all four hands if he wants to. He can do this in multiple ways. And then what's happening is, as long as you're looking at the glyphs, he is interfacing with your brain and basically giving you the thoughts that he wants you to have, so that you know what he's saying or what he's thinking. He can then also leave these glyphs, but because those glyphs can't change in real time, because he just leaves them and then they stay there, he can only communicate super simple things through those glyphs. So if you're looking at him, the glyph is changing rapidly and making you think a bunch of stuff, and if he leaves it somewhere, it's staying still. He can't keep changing it, and then it can only communicate something very, very basic. But that's what he does, and he tries to spread sort of like love and positivity and all of that kind of stuff through this. Now let's stop here for a second. This is the final sketch now that I decide to do all of the painting with. We've got the glyph and the glowy eye kind of in there. The glowy eye isn't too glowy. It's far less glowy than in the original sketch where the whole eyeball was glowy, but that was just too much and it was too distracting. So now we've just got the, I guess, kind of iris, the like eye slit more would be, I guess, clearer. And then the glyph is glowing. Nothing else is glowing because he just doesn't have any other glowy parts. And then he will eventually get all the tattoos, but it's not worth me doing that in the sketch right now because I just knew I was going to cover him in tattoos. There wasn't anything more specific than that. Since he was specifically going to have tattoos, like he was a real person in a real world getting tattoos from tattoo artists, as opposed to, like, let's say a ninja from a far off land or a warrior from some tribe that doesn't exist because everything's made up, and we're doing these sort of like big, more stylized and sort of like simplistic cartoony tattoos. For this guy, we wanted to go more realistic. So I knew that I was going to have to get in there and just design individual tattoos. When we get to that stage, I'll do zoom ins and everything so that you can see exactly what's going on there, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about them. There's only some thought that went into the tattoos. The rest of it was about like kind of hitting tropes and just trying to make sure that he looked authentic, really. Now, just to wrap up the backstory on him, he actually used to have a romantic relationship with another member of the cast, so I'll let you figure that out. He is the tallest member of the cast by quite a lot, even though he's skinny, and even though a character like Larry seems really big, he is still taller. You could almost think of him as like Faust, aka Dr. Baldhead from the Guilty Gear series, in the sense that in that he's like really hunched over and seems small, but then when he stands up he's like this big, like tall, lanky guy. That's similar to Rolf here. His name is Rolf simply because that was a sound that he could make with his voice that sounded close to something, and so they said, can we just call you that? And he agreed, and that's history. And that's what he goes by most people, but of course, like all alien type characters, he has a name that can't be pronounced by humans, etc., etc. So that, I think, covers the history of Rolf. The only other things that you really need to know from a story perspective is, like I said, he's a street artist. He basically lives to express himself. That's what he wants to do the most. He does get involved in some, let's say, violent shenanigans because he's on the street, and, you know, there's things like territory and run-ins with the police, and since he is an alien, he's got more complicated problems as well, but he definitely is not designed as a fighter like some other characters in this cast could be. He just deals with what he has to deal with in order to keep doing what he's passionate about. So that wraps up Rolf from a narrative perspective. I'm going to shut up now, and we're going to let the next chunk of video just play through, and we're gonna have it go somewhat fast, but the video is already going to be kind of long, so if you don't want to see that process play out, go ahead and just fast forward or whatever, try to find where I talk next. I'm not talented enough to tell you what time it is that you have to jump to, but you'll find it pretty easily, and then I think the next time I'll come in is when we talk about the tattoos. So if you see tattoos happening, that's when I'm going to start talking again. Alright, so coming up here is going to be the tattoo barrage. I will go through the file at the end of this so you can see exactly how the tattoo look is kind of created, but let's start zooming in on some things and see these. I'm going to talk about them as quickly as I can. This is a mix of tropes and some unique tattoos just to try and make him look realistic. I think everybody who's got tattoos, if you've got enough of them, you've got a couple of tropes on you. So I wanted to get the spiderweb tattoo in here. I wanted to get like a broken heart with like a 13 on it with some blood dripping from it. Here's like another classic razor blade kind of cutting into the skin tattoo. Now, these are all original designs, but definitely I referenced them. I didn't reference them in terms of like ripping off someone else's design, but I wanted to hit the same vibe as someone else's design because, of course, you would be going to lots of different tattoo artists who would have different styles and different subject matter and all that kind of stuff, and so I wanted to try and capture that. So there's going to be a couple of elements here or there where it's like I've seen somebody draw a whale like that, and that's probably because there's some tropey aspects to the way that they might do that whale, some things that are part of like either traditional tattooing or other just classifications of tattoo, like there's rules for it, and so you've probably seen some people that have done that kind of a thing, and then I'm trying to reference all of that history really quickly on this character, trying to like get to as many things as possible. For instance, for that elbow flower tattoo, I just looked at my own elbow flower really. So anyways, this little deep sea diver, that was actually an old logo that I made for a friend of mine that he never used for anything, and I just kind of took it and took the deep sea diver from it and traced over it and then added a bunch of extra bullshit around it to just kind of make it look like it's somehow his tattoo, somehow related. So we've also got this weird abstract piece on his forearm that ends up becoming a bigger abstract piece that has a bit of this almost like 90s vibe. We've got the flower tattoo. We've got something that looks like a skull and crossbones peeking around from the back of his arm. We got some knuckle tattoos, but he's only got he's only got 2 fingers per hand, but he's got 4 hands, so he's got the full 8. So you can figure out what his knuckle tattoos say. Anyways, then we've got just like a wrist, sort of like a classic wristband flowery thing happening here with some geometric flowers in there with some fill. I tried to keep the tattoos feeling the same because they're all just black, but at the same time feel like I'm touching a couple of different styles of tattoos because a lot of people have tattoos from different styles. He's got a blacked in deltoid over there, like he used to have something, and that's just like a big cover up, so he just went full black. He's got a rose on his arm, which is very similar to my character Rose, who I did a while back, the metalhead in the Slayer shirt. He's got this home tattoo, which of course he's from another planet, so trying to merge that kind of classic tattoo vibe with space. I think space tattoos are usually really hard to pull off, so I tried to make it look like it was still retro. We got an eyeball tattoo, which I just think is fun, and I kind of want to get myself now. We got ourselves a rose compass right here. Then we were sort of squeezing a little bit of like a Grim Reaper on this under deltoid. I'm sure he has a reason for getting all of these tattoos, but I don't know. It was really more just about filling the skin with stuff that just wasn't kind of like geometric filler, but actually looked like something. Then he's got a snake situation going around his arm that in my mind ends on the inner side of his forearm, but you know, we can't see that. Then you can see here this weird abstract house thing kind of is like dripping into this weird dude's face. We got some sort of a sentence on his under wrist. He's got 666 on his hand. Then we've got like a classic demon head ready to go for the top of his left hand. Here I just turned on the symmetry tool and looked at some reference and made my own adjustments and cranked this out. Again, I'm trying to reference specific things, so there's some things that are like similar to something that already exists because that's what a lot of people get, but then trying to, you know, put my own spin from here or there. He has no fingernails, so technically I could have like capped off one of his fingers as like being full black, and that would have been kind of interesting, but I decided it would have looked weird and drawn a lot of attention to it. Here we've got a classic dagger that's going to go on his forearm underneath his little elbow support band. Here is a tattoo in his native language that is just random gibberish, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to throw in there. We've got a speaker. We've got some sort of a parchment on there. We got some other stuff. Here I'm doing like an all-seeing eye kind of thing for his other hand. I'm a big fan of all-seeing eyes and eyeballs in general. Then it's got like a bit of a BF on there referencing something. Here we've got a grave. Again, trying to hit as many tropes as possible. It says "had fun" on it, which is just kind of a funny little, tattoo. He's a fan of Bad Religion, so of course he's got a Bad Religion tattoo on his arm. We've got some sort of a hand on fire, although you can barely tell what that is. We've got a tooth popping out. Here's just some like unfinished swirly shit on his other elbow. Like he didn't know what he really wanted to do with it. Maybe his friend tattooed it and then he just kind of never really did more with it. Here we have like a bit of a filler, like he's got like black fill, and then he's got some sort of a pseudo Day of the Dead kind of thing happening in there, but it's not really specific. And you can assume that the rest of that is like covering some other shit that he doesn't like anymore. Here we've got a centipede on his arm, and then we jump over here to a coffin on his neck with like this sort of funny cartoony ghost coming out that has like a really realistic face, which just kind of made me laugh when I started to do it, so I kind of want to get that tattooed too now. This is the biggest problem with drawing characters with tattoos. If you're a tattoo fan and you have a lot of tattoos, it just makes you want more tattoos. Here he's got a transplant tattoo, not transplants, although that's a fun band. He is a transplant, right? So he's got that tattooed on his tummy. Then he's got like just like a big classic symmetrical wolf on his chest. Here I'm just looking at reference again, looking at sort of the tropes of tattooing, how it might get constructed, building my own wolf from those tropes, using the symmetry tool, and then we warp it into the chest and erase away everything that would make it on his chest. Here we're doing all the blurring and opacity changes, which I will go over when we go through that. And then lastly, just throwing the glyph together. Now the thing that's really interesting about the glyph, which you're going to see, we're going to speed up now. I start adding like a little bit of extra noise on it. Noise meaning like little stray marks. We switch it to green and we shrink it as well. His whole like glowy thing goes from pink to green, which was a good idea, I think. It's like a greeny blue. And then here we're doing the rim lighting that's on all these characters. There you go. You can see the shrinking of the symbol. It was nice because the symbol is a key part of his character, but it was very overwhelming. So by shrinking that, lowering its intensity, we get like a better, less distracting version of it. And now we're coming into the home stretch where you're going to be seeing the final version of this character. Last little tweakies here and there. And now we are on the final version of the piece. Similarly, when I did my book, Pink Hair Girls, anytime you have a character that has lots of tattoos and you actually care about the tattoos being their own little illustrations, it ends up really multiplying the amount of work that goes into one of these characters, but it's so much fun, and at the end it's a character that has so much like rich texture and detail, and it's just really kind of cool. And just like tattoos on a real person, it can kind of tell their story, which I think is just really fun. But let's go ahead and take a look at the file so you can see exactly how some of this was structured. First, what we'll do is take a look at the general structure of the Procreate file, and then we will talk about the tattoo implementation specifically. So let's jump into these layers. You'll see here at the top, all of these are laid out in the same way, especially in the surrounding elements. So we've got the signature, but then we've also got this like nebula field, and then we've got the top smoke, the colorized smoke that we've got here. So let's undo those adjustments so we get it the way it's supposed to be. I'll turn all these off as a group now. If we turn off all of the shadows, you can see the base flats, which is where the tattoos live. I've done a deep dive on tattoos in the past, and I sort of illustrated that like the light sits on top of the tattoos, and so you want the light to affect the tattoos in the same way they affect everything else, and that's what really sells the fact that the tattoos are in the skin. But we'll get to that in a second. First, let's just go through these lighting layers really quickly. We've got everything that is sort of like this glowy effect stuff, which is the same as in every other. We've got some bounce light stuff. You can see it's really merged here because I was getting to the end of like just needing to save layer space. And then we've got the glow here. These were all separate pieces that eventually got merged. Just a line glow, duplicate blur, double the blur, adjust the layers, like that type of a thing. I've covered that in the past, so I won't just beat on about it right now. Then we've got this colorization. I usually do not have the glows that are in these pieces affect the color of the surrounding stuff, but I felt that it was kind of necessary on the hand since the hand was so strongly generating this glow. If we turn it off there, you can see that even though it adds some separation there, which is kind of nice, it really does diminish the fact that this thing is sitting in space. Some of the other glows from the other characters had more of like more of an organic, or there was like a clear source to the glow, and having this be just like this glyph that's floating was already really weird and alien, for lack of a better word. And so having the hand glow in there anchored it a little bit more to the actual world that it was around it. So I don't do that much, which is also why this glow isn't producing any kind of a rim light on the character, but I wanted to just bring a little bit of that in there. So let's turn off all of that real quick and go to the next batch of layers, which is the rim light. Now, I've talked about how to do this in the past, so I'm not going to do that again here, but you can see we've got the top glow that's set to an add layer. We've got the actual rim light itself. We've got the underglow, and then we've got this darkening to really push that rim light forward a bit more. Then we'll turn that off. We'll go to the next section. This is where we have kind of the general, almost like eye leading layers. So we've got this rimmed shadow. It's kind of like a vignetting shadow around the figure. If we turn both of those off, it looks like that. And then we've got the shadow that is, it's not a pure gradient. It's more of just like, if I turn off this mask, you can see I just fill it all in dark, and then I mask away the parts that I want to stand out a little bit more so that we can bring that eye up to his giant eye, basically. Let's turn these back on and then turn that off. Then the next set of layers, this is where I'm more or less co-locating all of my light. So we've got bounces right here, which are subtle. When you see them flipped on and off like that, though, you can kind of spot them. Then we have the harder bounces on the metal that I just wanted to be able to control separately because they're at a higher opacity. And then we have the highlights, which you can see on his eye blinking on and off right there. And then it's also happening a little bit on the metal on his belt as well. Turn all of this off. And then we've got that just light in general on his eye that is that big fat kind of reflective light. And then we've got just the light. This is, you can see when I turn this on and off, it's across everything. It sits on top of the tattoos. And one of the big things with this is that it is set to normal at 20%. Now, I don't normally do this. I'm going to do this really quick to demonstrate. If I set this back to 100%, and then I set this to something like an overlay, you can see what we get here is we get, it's more intense, it's like shinier, right? And that's fine. And for some things that looks really, really good. But I personally don't think it works as well with capturing the tattoo look because it keeps the intensity of the tattoo still pretty strong. You can see, for instance, right here, like that is still a pretty dark tattoo as it is. And the thing about tattoos, if you have any, is like, turn your arm or leg or wherever you've got the tattoo so that the light is creating a sheen across your skin, and you'll start seeing that you can actually almost make a tattoo invisible because the light is sitting on top of it. Basically, it's activating a shine across it, which is basically just flat out covering the tattoo itself. And I think that when you set a light source like this to an overlay, you don't get that effect as much. Now I'm going to undo it. So we'll undo the overlay and then we'll lower the opacity back to 20%. And the thing that I like about this is it actually does take the intensity of the tattoo down because now this light is sitting on top of it, which is kind of more the way it behaves. So again, I'm not like a skin scientist here, but it's kind of like shadows make everything dark, light makes everything light, right? But we want that light to obscure the tattoo in the same way that the shadow is technically obscuring it. The shadow is bringing it to black, and we want that light to bring it more to white so that we're trying to like accurately represent that light. It's kind of a really weird way to explain it, and I mean, it's not really a scientific way to explain it, but I think that I mean, hopefully that makes sense. That's kind of how I think about it in my head. So I'm turning all these layers back on, turn that folder off, and then lastly we have our sort of core shadow layers. Not core shadows, but core shadow layers. Two different terms, I guess you could say. Here we have the the sort of soft rounding shadow. Then we have, this is just the hot rim that you can see on parts. Like look here on his stomach, you can see it turning on and off where that shadow hits the lip part. Then we have the cast shadow, because he has a pretty strong light on him, so we're casting shadow onto ourselves, or he's casting it onto himself. And then we have the ambient occlusion shadow, which you can see right there. And now once that's turned off, there's almost no form to him, there's only shape. There are some areas like this where I do a little bit of extra AO, but that's just because I really needed to push things like his hands forward so that it read clearly. Turn all these back on, and then turn it off for a second. So now we're down to the flats. Let's ignore like all the details of these flats. These flats have been merged quite a bit at certain stages. As you know from the walkthrough, they were all more separated, and then I had to bring them together because of layer limits. Once you start putting tattoos on a character, it becomes a lot of layers just by default. So let's turn off this layer and just put this one to 100%. Let's remember that it was at 52. So this is how I drew all of the tattoos. I did it using the fat pencil. I didn't worry about the fact that it looks really pencil-y because I knew that it was going to get reduced in opacity and blurred and all those other things. The way that I make the tattoo look most like a tattoo is through three things. I've talked about this in the past, but let's highlight it here since we've got so many tattoos going on here. It is blur and fade and light. Those first two things are because tattoos age, right? The instant they get put into your skin, your body starts trying to break them down, and that's what happens. They blur out over time and they fade over time. And the stronger and bolder your tattoo is, the longer it lasts, or I should say the longer it looks clear is probably the better way to say that. This particular character has only black work. He's got a little bit of gray here or there, but it's basically only black work, which means that these are probably going to stay pretty strong for a long time, although some of the more shaded areas would probably fuzz out a little bit more or go away a little bit faster. So then we duplicate this layer. In fact, I will just replicate what we've got here. What do we do here? 65... and then cleared. Okay, good. So there's a couple of different ways that I'll do tattoos. So right now we've got this sitting at 100%. I'm going to duplicate it. You can see it gets super dark here because it's duplicated. Then we're going to blur it. About like that, let's say. That's a little more dramatic than it would be in real life, but this whole image is more dramatic than it would be in real life. That's kind of the point, right? We're having to play all of this up. So now that that's been done, these tattoos are way too black. That's basically what your tattoo looks like for like the first day that you have it, and then it starts fading after that, right? So what we want to do is we want to start lowering all the opacities of this, but we want to do it in a way where we're seeing how the two of them work together. If we lower the opacity on our core layer, you can see that we start losing the definition. Let's stay really zoomed in for this. We start losing the definition because the blur is taking over, right? But that's still too dark. So now we also need to lower the blur. And then it's like, okay, are we starting to get what feels right? Well, just to make sure for this piece, I actually do this a couple of different ways, but for this piece, then what I did was I selected my original sharp tattoo and I cleared it from the blur one. So now if we turn off the sharp tattoo, this is what we get, right? We're only getting the blur that's beyond the original line art. Then we turn these both on, and now what we can do is instead of adjusting the two opacities in an overlapping way where they are codependent on each other for darkness, we are adjusting them in different ways. Sorry, not in different ways, but we're adjusting them so that they are differently impacting their area. And we can make this exactly how we want. So it's like, okay, let's make it a darker tattoo. It's newer. Well, that means we'll make this darker and we'll pull the blur down more. Or maybe we want them to be older. So we pull the blur way up and we pull the tattoo way down. We probably want to keep them a little bit closer in value though. We don't want the blur to be darker than the actual tattoo itself. And that's how we end up generating a tattoo that looks aged. Now, if we zoom in here a little bit more, let's get these about where they were. I mean, I think that's actually really close to what they were in the original. Now, the one thing though is since we blurred, any of the tattoo that's at the edge is going to be blurred outside of the skin. So that means at some point we need to take the skin layers, select them, and delete outside of that. Now, one thing is that would also require, though, some new layers. We have to merge new layers together and create a selection and all that kind of stuff. But we've positioned the tattoos in a spot where actually we maybe haven't. No, we haven't entirely. So you can see right here, the tattoo is still bleeding into like the backpack. So the way that we would have to deal with this is how I would deal with it. At least, do I have a layer to play with? I do not, so I'm at my layer maximum. So what I would have to do here normally is let's go ahead and just merge the backpack together so we get one layer back. Now let's take and duplicate this. Select the coat and then clear away. Clear. Move it up. Select this and clear, just to make sure we're being thorough. Select this. So we got to do this all the way up, or at least this is the way that I would go about doing it. This is the AO, so we don't need that. Okay, now we're here to this extra hand, so we can, actually we're not going to be able to duplicate that. Here, let's copy, and then undo the merging. So this is really tedious. I would not recommend doing this. Wait, did we undo the merge? Undo new layer, undo select, undo merge. There we go. Right, and so we can't create a new layer. So we delete, new, and paste. Okay, so now we've got that. Then we move that up. We merge, copy, undo the merge. You can see there, delete, new. I always go there to paste. Paste, up. What is this one? This is more AO, so we can ignore that. Then we go to here, we merge, copy, undo the merge, delete, new layer. This is super tedious. When I actually did this in the piece though, I didn't have this many layers, so it was easier to handle. Okay, now we move it up here. So now what we have, select, is we have all the skin layers properly cleared, not taking into account, of course, any layers that are above it. We select that, then we go to invert. Okay, let's do select, invert, and we go to our blur, which you can see right there on the elbow pretty well, and we clear. Clear. Now we're no longer having that shadow go on the outside. If we go, let's delete that layer that we made, go all the way back to the top now, and when we turn on our shadow and our light layers, everything should play nicely together. Okay, so that was a little complicated. That's kind of how you have to do it sometimes when you're really up against your layer limit. Another example of something I could have done was I could have turned everything off and then just copied those parts, and I could have done a few things like that. There's ways that you can do it, but that's sort of the problem solving that I always kind of suggest you try to focus on in order to get around situations like that, because it can get pretty hairy when you're really you're towards the end of a piece and you're trying to get a lot of it to come together, but every time you go to create a new layer, you're getting stuck against that layer limit. So that might show you a good way to kind of try and get around that. But more importantly, that shows you how I did the tattoos for Rolf here. And that's going to do it for Rolf. Here again is the final version of the image, and now we'll jump to the fun little sort of black and white alternate so you can check that out. And that wraps it up. If you got any questions down below, please make sure you hit me up. I love responding to comments. I try to respond to everybody, and that would be just super cool if you're wondering about something. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting like. If you aren't already subscribed, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you on the next one. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are all the places where you can find me.